Welcome to the Rabbit Hole Radio. My name is Eddie.
My name is Yaoki.
And we are the hosts of this show. Today we have a very special guest.
I'm Andy. Hi everyone.
Welcome to our show, Andy.
Welcome.
And just to let you guys know, Andy is first year in McAllister. He's our classmate. He's our friend. And yeah, please introduce yourself, Andy.
Okay. I'm from China. I grew up there. Before that, I was born in the U.S. After high school with Yaoki in Japan. I took a gap year, kind of just traveling or staying at home.
Oh,
and then
nice.
Now I'm here with you guys, and I'm studying undecided major, honestly.
Yes.
I'm thinking of doing English or physics or math or philosophy.
That's
I'm doing a music minor.
That's very liberal artsy. And in case you don't know where to find Andy, when you go to Cafe Mac, you can find him. He's a very hard worker. I always see him during dinner. And and what did you do in your gap year?
So there's a premise in this. So after I graduated, I knew I had to go back and stay in China for like a very long time because
Why?
I haven't been home for like 3 years during my high school in Japan. It was the period of COVID, right? And because I was born in the U.S., I didn't have citizenship to China. And during the COVID, China set like a very strict policy. So you can't really enter during the time. So I wanted to take a year off and spend time with my family. And then during the year, first half, I reapplied to college. I went travel like near some places in my city. I went to Nanjing. I went to Shanxi province because they had a film festival there called Yao Film Festival, hosted by Jia Zhang, if you know the director. He's pretty good.
That's really nice.
The next half of the year, which is after the new year, I went to Japan again. I visited Isaac again.
Yeah.
I don't know if you saw me.
I saw you.
Yeah. I lived in like my
See,
friends'
you guys
places.
even say hi.
I think we said hi.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure you said.
Okay.
Anyway, I traveled to Japan again. What else? Then I went traveling around Europe. I went to Cannes Film Festival. It's in France.
Cannes.
Okay. And then like
That's
Italy
crazy.
and like some places in Europe. Then I came back.
Wow, I'm so jealous. It sounds so fun.
Yeah, that's a lot of things to do in a year.
It's not really. I didn't really do a lot of stuff.
What is film festival like? I've never been to any film festivals. Like I cannot like even imagine what is it like.
Oh, so for Cannes Film Festival, because I didn't like submit any films, I was like an audience. So I have to apply in advance in like January or February. I have to write up some kind of letter or statement saying that why I am interested in their film festival.
Whoa.
Then they grant if they probably like it. If they like it, they give you a 3-day access to the film festival where you can go to their website and basically just book every film they have during that 3 days. So I kind of just went there. A lot of films were too popular. Like a lot of films.
So like commercial?
No, it's a mixture of both. It's both commercial and indie. Like a lot of commercial films you see today in theaters are first premiered in Cannes. For example, Anora, The Substance, The Brutalist. Oh, The Brutalist was first premiered in Berlin, I think.
Yeah.
But a lot of films were first going to show in the Cannes.
Oh.
Also, there's a film called Flow with like little black cats. And I watched that in Cannes too.
Yeah.
It was very good. I watched like 15 or something films during the 3 days.
Wow.
Like I basically didn't eat anything because I wanted to watch every film they had, at least in the main competition group.
But like these ones are like these movies are like for competitions, right? Like so after being like shown, and then it's gonna be like there's gonna be session too.
There's gonna be like Palme d'Or and everything.
Yeah.
Yeah, I basically didn't eat anything. I just basically buy a bread and I stand in the line, wait for the film. For some film, it's really competitive. you can't really get the ticket. For example,
Yeah.
Megalopolis was really hard to get.
Mhm.
It's a new film by Francis Coppola. He made Godfather, so it's
Oh,
like
yeah,
too
what's that?
popular, like
God.
a very famous masculine film,
Mhm.
I guess. Oh, his daughter made Lost in Translation. Do you know that film?
No.
It's about like some people traveling Japan. Yeah.
As you can tell, I don't really watch films.
That's very interesting. Like,
Yeah.
Yaoki is a person who kind of never watched films.
Yeah, I've never heard of any of the film you mentioned.
It's fine. It's just
Yeah.
like a bunch of films.
Which what's your favorite?
There's this film called All We Imagine Is Light. It's like the first Indian film to actually get into Cannes for the past 30 years or so. It
Mhm.
tells the story of three women around knees and 30s living in Mumbai, I think. And they live together. One of the roommates, her marriage was basically decided for her by her parents. And the other roommate, she's like falling in love with this man that's not decided by the parent.
Oh.
So there's this kind of tension between them.
Is it
Beca-
kind of like Romeo and Juliet?
No.
No?
No, there's a tension between the roommates.
Oh,
Because they have this kind of jealousy, or they're trying to figuring out like what marriage is going to be like and how their relationship develops. And there's also this nurse who worked in Mumbai for like 20 years or so.
Mhm.
But because her husband died, she didn't have any proof that she lived there. So they're kicking her out.
Oh,
It's like, it feels like a film that's supposed to center in the city, you know?
yeah.
But it kind of spans around the topic of middle class and gender and like the way the system works. I really liked it. But for every film in the main competition, I would say there's some kind of merit to it. Even though there were films that the audience really hated.
Mhm.
There's this film from Latin America. It's very intense because there's a lot of explicit scenes and also violent scenes.
Oh,
But I would say because the director established some kind of style to it, and you can see that there's a systematic effort behind it. It's not just some
Yeah.
random decision
Okay.
thrown into the scenes. So I would say most of the films I watched are pretty good.
I see. That's interesting. I feel like I have one simple question. This might be a bit offensive to people who like films, but like as a person again, like if you don't watch film, I was wondering what's so special about the film festival, because like I feel like you can just watch any film online, or maybe not sure, but like many of it online, and there's like less and less people who even go to the theater.
yeah.
And in this current situation, what's so like outstanding about going to film festival?
Okay, yeah, that's a very good question. For Cannes, I think there's many parts to it that really attracts me. So first, I took film in high school. Our school had this film course in IB.
I'm so
So
jealous.
we could make films by ourselves, and we kind of just analyze films and watch films together in class. So I developed this kind of interest in film, like trying to analyzing it systematically instead of just watching it on my own. And Cannes Film Festival is like one of the best film festivals in the world. And most filmmakers would want to submit their films to the festival first before showing it into any theaters, or you can find anything online. So Cannes Film Festival is the first place you would go to if you want to watch the film, like the newest films and the best newest films that comes out that year. You cannot find it anywhere else.
Yeah.
And some films that go into the film festival might never get published because there are distributors who comes to the film festival and decide what kind of films they want to buy. So there are a lot of films that you really can't find online. It's very hard to find. And also, you mentioned theater, right? Like going to the theater in the US is pretty expensive. It's like around $20 and you watch like 20 minutes of advertisement beforehand.
Yeah.
It's totally unreasonable. You can just watch the film in festival.
Yeah.
If you really think about it, film festival for Cannes, the films are free. They don't charge you anything. All you have to pay is the residence, like you live there. And I couch crashed with like 4 other people who are Chinese.
Like
So we
couch
basically
surfing?
just Yeah, kind of.
Yeah.
Like we rented this Airbnb together, so it's like really cheap.
Oh.
So it's like cheaper than you would normally go to theaters to watch a film. I think the most expensive part is probably eating and
You
the
didn't eat.
ticket. But I have to wait in line for the film to like watch like 5 films every day, so I didn't really eat anything. It's mostly just the flight there. But if you're like going to Europe anyway, it's not that expensive.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah. That's it. And also a lot of films they don't play it in theater too.
Exactly. That's true. Also, like, depends.
And you can also see like the directors who directed the film. They're all there waiting for the awards, right? So for example, I saw Francis Coppola who directed Godfather. I
Do you get
ran
a signature or
I
something?
ran into this like Chinese celebrity called his first name is Peng.
Huh?
Peng Lian.
Oh,
Do you know him?
Yeah.
Yeah, he's like very famous, very handsome. A lot
Like
of
the
people just
handsome
want
guy,
him.
yeah.
Yeah, he's just walking his dog by the beach, and I ran into him. Right, I was like, "Wait, was that him?" And then
Yo.
this Taiwanese, like probably his office lady or something, just came and blocked my phone because they don't want me to shoot a picture of him.
But did you take a picture?
Well, I didn't because she's like just standing in front of my phone. She's like, "No," and I was like,
Oh
"Okay,"
my
but then I want to like take it out when I was farther away from him. She came out of nowhere again. Like she's like
What?
just watching me, apparently.
That's crazy. Damn. Wow. I'm so jealous.
Yeah, and also you get to meet a lot of new people. Like I met all these Chinese people who study in Europe. I was renting an Airbnb together. I basically just sleep on the small sofa. But the people were really fun.
You just met them in the festival?
No, we communicated in advance online to rent the Airbnb together. They study like they come from all over the places. Some want to make film. There was this guy who's like he was really an oddball. He studies like film in Russia. And then there was like 3 other guys. They came together. They studied engineering and some kind of physics stuff in German, which is probably very hard because
Yeah, it's Germany, bro.
yeah.
Okay, that's so nice.
Yeah.
And do you also see other celebrities like those people in Hollywood? Like
Yeah, there was this very famous film called Poor Things.
oh,
like,
you saw Stone?
I think they were there, but I didn't really care because the director's new film really sucked ass. It was like the worst film I ever watched in
Like-
Cannes.
Poor Things.
No, it's his newest film.
Which one?
I don't even remember the name. That's how bad it was. Like I think Cannes they take some of the films from Hollywood
Yeah.
not because how good it is, but because they want the fame too.
Uh-huh.
They want the celebrities to be there.
Yeah.
A lot of Chinese celebrities were there, like Jia Zhangke. Bi Gan was also there.
Oh,
He filmed this film about COVID,
Mm-hmm.
but it's like banned in China now. But I didn't get to like see it until like later because it was very hard to get the ticket.
Yeah.
So I watched it like very late.
Yeah, Bigan's movie, like you cannot see Bigan's movie in China. I saw Bigan's movie online when I was, Mobi is like a streaming platform.
Yeah, I have movie subscription.
Oh, you have it?
Yeah.
Yeah, but I don't use it very often, so I guess I unsubscribed it. But it was really nice.
Yeah, the way movie works is pretty good. It's like tailored for people if you like really into indie films.
Yeah.
Because a lot of mainstream films they get kind of repetitive if
Yeah,
you
exactly.
keep watching it.
Wait, what's indie film again?
Indie films like those that doesn't rely on
Mhm.
the industry. They make it themselves.
Oh.
They don't go to like Hollywood or
Yeah. Also, like the ones you see like in cinema, they're not in.
most films cinema are not indie. There are some that are really good.
Yeah,
that
and,
gets
the
to
popular ones.
play
and,
indie.
Yeah.
A lot of indie films, for example, in Asia, they never get to play it properly in theater.
Yeah.
Like this Thai director called Api Chapon. He's like one of my
Yes.
favorite director. And he's like very
cinematography
censored.
is so beautiful.
He's very censored in Thailand. I think it's due to his political activism and the like. So, and he's very experimental.
Yeah.
Like, if you're not in a good setting or you're not in the right mood and the right time to watch it, you might fall asleep. Like that's
Yeah.
Yeah.
So if you don't play the film at cinema, where do you play it? How do people access to it?
Well, for a lot of people, they just pirate, I guess. I don't really think of pirating film as like
Yeah.
unethical because a lot of films they're not in theater and you don't get to watch it elsewhere. If you don't want to pirate it, I subscribe like to stream service. One is the movie we mentioned.
Yeah.
They put like a new film or something every month.
Yeah, they switch indie films
Yeah.
like every month. So
They kind of curated like an exhibition
Yeah.
and tailor it around certain themes. The other thing is the other streaming service is called Criterion Channel. They started as this collection company. They put the old films into like I'm not sure how to call it, like the discs. You play it on the Blu-ray sticks and you like actually collect them physically. Like a lot of good films today that are survived really well is because they started to like save it. Because the films used to be, they weren't digital before.
Yeah.
They used to be like
Right.
physical copies. So you have to like make it into some kind of form to preserve it. And Criterion does it really well. And then they started this streaming service, which allows you to see like a bunch of classical films in their newest 4K version, which like they repaired. Like a lot of films that were famous in the film history, you probably can't find them today. Like the films from 90s or 30s,
Yeah.
a lot of films are actually just lost.
Why
due
is
to
that?
time.
Is it
Because
it's just
people weren't
naturally-
consciously preserving them and stuff. Yeah, they just get lost.
But like they were distributed, right? Like how
Some films that weren't commercially distributed
Yeah.
can get lost like very easily.
Makes
And some films get like found like 10 or 20 years later.
With a different quality. Yeah.
Like for example, there's a very famous film called Metropolis. It's from 1927. It's like one of the best films ever made.
Yeah.
But there's 30 minutes that got lost for like a very long time. Yeah, and it's also like silent film. They had orchestra playing it along with the film during the silent era. So I'm not sure about this, but like the music we have of that film today is probably not very accurate.
Oh.
Because the silent film, they don't have any sound. You have to have people play it live along the film.
Wow. That's super interesting because like
Yeah.
I feel like it won't happen in the future for the film produced now, right? Because it's mostly online and it's like kind of difficult to erase it completely.
Yeah.
So it get preserved pretty well, I feel like. So I feel like the fact that it used to be like one film could be completely gone from like the history or like maybe the name preserved, but
Yeah.
the actual film is gone. It's interesting.
I mean, I feel like it's still possible to lose something.
Oh.
Even in the digital age. There's this new field now called media archaeology. Because I think since the inventing of the internet, like probably 90% of the websites, you can't access them anymore. They're like
Yeah.
dead links. If you go to Wikipedia, a lot of the references you can't actually like get it.
Yeah, that happens.
You
a
know,
lot,
right?
Which
Like-
is disturbing.
Yeah, a lot of like things that you thought because you uploaded it online, they're gonna be kept forever. It's probably not as permanent as you imagine them to be.
Mm-hmm.
There's also this thing called Internet Archive. They're like
Yeah.
websites that you put in the link and they kind of save a screenshot of it.
Yeah, I
Right.
used that one before.
Yeah, it's also how you get past the paywall. Like if you want to read like a New York article, Times article, or New Yorker, you paste the link into the Internet Archive so you can read it for free. That's like most of
Wow.
the reasons I used it.
Like the reason why I used it is just like I want to see, like because as a kid I was like searching stuff on internet and it's been a while. I just want to find this like nostalgia back in the days. But I wasn't that smart to use it for like paywall and stuff. I noted it down though.
Yeah.
So
You should use it. Oh no. You should pay it.
Don't pay for the capitalism.
okay. Sure.
Personal opinion. It's really weird because like sometimes you want to read an article that's really good, but it's like the only article you want to read.
Yeah.
Like from some magazines, they don't
Mhm.
they don't even like publish a lot of articles.
Mm.
But if you want to subscribe it for like a year, it's probably like $60 or $100.
Yeah.
My opinion is that I think resources, especially like educational and literary resources, should be free.
Yeah.
Like people who can pay should pay them. But if like you can't really afford it, you shouldn't pay.
Yeah. Like I was thinking about this a while ago. I was like maybe like if you I agree with you. Like educational or journalism should be free to people. Like it shouldn't be paywalled. But then at the same time, if you don't put the paywall, it's most likely gonna be like commercials, like ads put on them. And it could be good. I mean, many websites nowadays is funded by those ads. But then if it's like sponsored by particular companies, the journalism especially could be leaning towards those companies, and which is also something I don't want. So I was thinking how journalism should be, because it's not something it can be produced free. It costs money to produce journalism, but there has to be a way to pay journalists money, the cost for, at least for the cost of it. I don't know how it should be.
Yeah, I feel like what you said is right. I feel that the current kind of paywall that exists is totally fine to me, because those who want to read it, if you really can, you want to pass the paywall, you can use those archive links to do so.
I see. That's we have choice to.
Yeah, if you don't really want, like, if you don't want your magazine to like, if you don't want people to pass the paywall, you can also just kind of block the website. And like there are magazines that actually do that, like the Paris Review, which is like a really good literary magazine. You cannot use Internet Archive for that website.
Whoa.
So if you really care, you don't have to. But I think it's a kind of tacit agreement between, like, saying some magazine companies and some readers. Like they kind of just allow that to happen because they know it doesn't matter. They have enough subscriptions to run it already.
I see. That makes sense. Yeah, I feel like your interest is pretty broad. Like you talk about how you're interested in film, and you now talk about journalism, education, and capitalism. And you also said you're also interested in physics as well, right?
Oh yeah.
Or math.
Where did that come from?
Yeah, it seems to me pretty random. I wonder if there's any connection between those different subjects, or how is it so broad?
I feel like my interest is never pinned to a single place. And it's very hard to explain why. You can say that I lack focus or something. But I also feel like it's because I'm genuinely just want to know what's going on in these kind of places. Like, for example, for philosophy, I was writing like a lot of philosophical articles during high school for WeChat accounts. And because I like to read books and watch films, so I feel like it's kind of natural that I'm interested in philosophy. For science, like physics especially, I got interested in physics because there was a huge period in my middle school that I basically read every science fiction I could find in my local library.
Wow. What was the best one?
It's really hard to say.
That's so hard.
For now, I'm gonna say it's Philip K. Dick's books. Do You Androids Dream of Electric Sheep, which is adapted into Blade Runner, and then Ubik, I don't know how you call it. Like, he's pretty good. And there's also this writer called Ursula Le Guin. She wrote The Left Hand of Darkness, which imagines a planet where kind of this anthropologist, from his perspective, we go into the planet and we discover that everyone there is kind of asexual. So they're not gendered per se. Like, gender is really randomly assorted on their planet. So for like 22 days, they're in this period called latent period, so they're not gendered at all.
Yeah.
But there are like 6 days in every month where they develop into this random sex. And that's when they can like produce offsprings and everything. Like, for example, you can see a lot of kind of weird twist of our culture. You can read that, oh, the king is pregnant.
Yeah.
And stuff like that. So it kind of just this tiny minutiae details that kind of just distorts your like recognition of gender patterns. That's like really cool. Like, I like science fiction because it's kind of like philosophy. It's like a philosophical experience where you just change like this tiny, say, oh, what if there's a technology like this instead of that? Or what if like our society is constructed around this thing instead of that? And then you start to really see the difference or the other possibilities outside what we daily encounter. Yeah, so that's I guess why I like physics too. I took physics in high school. I haven't taken it yet here, so I don't know if I'll still like it after I take it next year. Like, for English, it's because I read a lot. Like, I also write some poetry and stories. So Like I'm like generally just interested in these things, I guess. And it's also because like sometimes because I had like been to all these different education systems. I was raised in US during like kindergarten, and I went to a public school in Wuhu, which is like a small city in China. And then I transferred to like a bigger public school in like the capital of like our province.
Yeah.
And now I went to international school, and now I went to UWC. And I feel like different environment kind of just catalysts your different interests. They push you into different directions, and you ended up in this kind of rabbit hole holding your podcast that you get interested in all these things.
Yeah.
Because you like met all these different people.
Exactly. Yeah.
Right.
That's impressive.
Do you find any connection between those different subjects?
Well, I actually think there are more difficult like connections than people think. For example, I was watching like everyone probably knows that literature and philosophy is hugely related, but I also feel like philosophy and science is not as separated as people think. Like sometimes you think of philosophy as like people sitting in armchairs and just pointing at scientists and saying, "Oh, you did this wrong. You should have done it this way," or like there's some minor problems in your experiments.
Yeah.
Well, that's probably like a part of the philosophy community, and I'm not saying they're wrong, but like there are a lot of other connections too. I was reading about. I watched this MIT lecture on quantum mechanics yesterday, and it talks about superposition, and I actually realized that the language of quantum mechanics is the kind of language I wanted to look for in philosophy, because in life you actually experience a lot of kind of contradictions. And when you really encounter them, it feels like this abyss, say, when you try to communicate with someone, but then even though you're both like communicating in this really civilized manner, they can still like not understand you, or they just come from a very different place than you, so you don't really understand them. And I think that could be a problem of language. That could be the problem of like philosophy, but it's also like heavily reliant on like say literature or the language you're trying to use. Like there are a lot of things like that make you think, oh, where can I find the solution to that? Or like it makes you wonder what is exactly happening, because reality is not as like you precisely perceive.
That's true. And in a lot of cases, I feel like the barrier drawn between physics and philosophy comes from this like the limitation of languages, which like you conceptualize ideas, but this conceptualization can cause like differences, which leads into differences in disciplines. Maybe because like as you can say, like you were talking about like superposition. I was like actually having this conversation with another one of my friend. We were talking about Taoism. We're talking about the state of being and non-being.
Yes.
The state of emptiness.
I agree.
And non. And I was like arguing that it's by a certain time it can be like this uneven state of a superposition of non and being.
Yeah.
But like he was arguing that it is by any chance it was like kind of disturbing or like kind of weird to kind of you blend these two disciplines, which I also understand, but I just like it is very fun, always fun to kind of make connections, especially when you get into quantum physics. Especially like vocabularies, concepts you are using is kind of weird, I would say.
I actually agree with you on that. Like for the last the philosophy class I took last semester, I think especially Western philosophy, they put a lot of emphasis on binary, and they can't really jump out of that loophole. Like for example, I never understood why free will and determinism is like very different from each other. I feel like you can definitely see it as something that is coexisting. Like you can't understand it literally. Like, oh, if you're determined, you can be free. Like you can be like freely determined or determined free. You know, I feel like when you really go into it, it starts to feel like a language trick. Like you're like, oh, it's because you're determined, so you cannot be free. But they're talking about things separately. So I totally see that you can like put it together. And for like Tao Te Ching, right?
Yeah.
Like I was thinking about it, and it really makes sense. I was studying programming like Python in my gap year.
Yeah.
And it came to me that the way computer organizes one and zeros is similar to the way you put nothingness and beingness together. Like it's I feel like that's the only thing you really need to construct anything at all. Like you need absence, and you need something that's present. And for example, now I'm like jumping back to literature again. Like Sappho's poem. Sappho is this poetess from ancient Greek, and a lot of her poems are lost. So what we really can see is just some fragment words, and the other are like blanks. But you cannot think about blanks as incompleteness. You should think about it as like a part of what makes Sappho's poems Sapphoic, because that absence represents a period of probably chaos that, or like civilization that didn't preserve the text. It represents its own history too, and you cannot just simply see it as like something that's incomplete. And it's like also similar to a lot of other stuff. Like when you think about, for example, people think about living and dying as contradicting. Last semester, our preceptor asked, "Why do you think it is that when we really love a person, we feel like we want to be with them together, and we kind of have this self-destruction will at the same time?"
Yeah.
And that's where it confuses me, because I feel like self-destruction can totally be eternalized. Like, I don't think death and like, oh, this love preserving forever is like contradicting. Like, some people imagine self-destruction because they want their love to be preserved forever. So like, I don't see it as that binary. Even though like, say, one and zeros and beings and nothingness are like binaric.
Yeah.
But they also like kind of just implies or annotates some kind of larger system behind it, not just like simple oppositions.
That's super interesting. I feel like the presence of absence, like it sounds contradictory to say there's a nothingness, right?
Yeah.
But I don't have enough words to describe my thought completely. But in my deep in my mind, I get what you're saying. Like, it feels like it doesn't contradict. And I was like, we were talking about this like last semester, how utilitarianism and Kantianism is seen as like contradicting idea, but it actually seems like it can be coexisted.
Yeah, I was thinking about that. Yeah, that was because I feel like in philosophy, like in the discipline of philosophy, and the like what we perceived as philosophy can be different, especially in academia, and how like academia, they tell you how like, oh, this is like Kant. It's not like this is not like utilitarianism. But like, eventually, I think we're like talking about this. There's a common core in both of the theories that let me think.
Like, I feel like we entered this kind of muddy field of ambiguousness where like you really can't, because there are a lot of things you really can't say if it's right or wrong, or you can't really put a pin to say, oh, you can push this to this kind of extremity or that kind of extremity.
Yeah.
Because in the end, I feel like it's rather circular than say they're like very far away from each other. You cannot think of it as like just this two-dimensional plane. You have to think of it as like, I think it's circular. Like when you go farther enough one way into the universe, you kind of just return to the original position.
Yeah.
The same, like if you're like radical enough, you turn conservative. Like it's not because you're more radical than the other people, you become like more radical. It's that then you become like the opposite of them. Like it's circular. You kind of just wander around in the same place, or you get muddy and it's ambiguous.
Yeah, that's why we're like talking about we're talking about the virtue as well. Because like there's like it's like a fuzzy ball that like when we talk about that, we know what it denotes, but we actually cannot describe it because Aristotle said it's a feeling. But I feel like it's just it's an indication of what we consider like this fuzziness that is beyond languages, that we have to use another factor to kind of factorize it. So like we use feeling in that case. I was like same with utilitarianism and deontologists. Well, both of them like what were we like arguing about? I wasn't like remembering completely. Can you remind me of the few ideas we were like talking about?
I think we were saying like if you became the perfect utilitarianist, you're gonna be a deontologist.
So like I remember we were like arguing about there is like an alignment in between the purpose of utilitarian and deontologist and the motif of deontologist. But I don't remember it specific but when we are talking about the languages, like the wording of both, and there was this like linguistic contradiction that sets these two theories apart, but like we can feel it.
Yeah.
There is something in common.
Yeah. You kind of remind me of like this paradox by Russell saying, for example, this sentence is wrong. And this sentence is a paradox because if it's wrong, it's not wrong. If it's not wrong, it's wrong. But to me, it's not a paradox because it means that sentence cannot refer to itself rather than saying, this is a paradox. It cannot be right or wrong. And that to me is very similar to superposition. It's like you cannot follow it's like you cannot ever reach self-consciousness. You can never be like, I'm very self-conscious about myself.
Yeah.
That's kind of impossible.
Yeah.
In the same way, sentence cannot just be meta,
Yeah.
Like, for example, the concept of meta.
Yeah.
Like there are like meta films, meta fictions, but it's really weird because they say the film is like commenting on the form of fiction, but every fiction is commenting on the form of fiction.
Yeah.
Like everything is in a way like self-referencing, but in a way it can never be as self-referencing as say this sentence is wrong. They cannot do that.
Yeah, that's true. And it's like so fascinating to talk about how there's something that cannot be determined in either right or wrong. Like I feel like, especially like if you're studying Western philosophies, we try to figure out what is right and what is wrong, but it's not necessarily the case always. But then at the same time, as a political science intended measure, I'm also aware of the fact that there are sometimes we need to determine what is right and what is wrong.
When it comes to like applications.
Yeah,
you have to
applications of the
make a
philosophy.
decision.
Yeah, like I agree with you that things is not that simple, but as a matter of reality, we have to decide. We have to have some standard of deciding what is right and what is wrong. And that's what I'm struggling with my personal philosophy, which is more towards what you were saying, like more Asian or more like
Western.
ambiguity.
Yeah.
But then it doesn't really give the answer. I mean, that's the whole point, but
Yeah.
I was trying to ask you guys, what do you think about that?
Do you want to say something?
Wow. It comes to, it's so very like this is a very broad question. I cannot really comment on that, but I do agree that there's like a discrepancy on what we on like modern contemporary Western philosophy and what we consider like Oriental, or which is a problematic term, but like Asian philosophies. That's because that's what we know. I don't know about like other parts, like regional philosophies. Like I also had this like conversation with my friend about like these philosophies. Like if you really want to find answers, you don't, because there's no answers. It's based on I would say like metaphors, metonymies, and like all these phrases, which interpreting itself is a very like westernized process. Like you try to figure out the meaning, you try to decipher it, but like that's like the paradox. Like what do we really do, and which pathway do we choose?
I agree. I don't feel like there's an application to philosophy. Like even if you are really clear about something, if you know something very well, it doesn't mean you can do it well. Like I can make an example of this. Like Hegel talks about this relationship between master and slave, and the master probably knows how to like make the slave work harder, but that doesn't mean like he knows about the relationship between him and the slave. The slave knows more because he has to know when his master wants to beat him. He has to know when his master is like happy, so he can get something from it. Like it's always the disadvantaged, underprivileged people who knows better about the world than people who rules the world. Because when you're like high enough, you don't really need to know anything anymore. It's the same with like, for example, in a marriage, like most men would not need to know as much as the wife. Like the wife needs to know a lot because they're probably in an economic disadvantaged position or something. Or it's usually like like men can simply have like a better power dynamic, like by natural. Like they kind of just I don't know how to describe it. Like sometimes men are in a better power dynamic, so like the woman knows more about these kind of relationships than men.
That's true. Do we say that's bad, or do you not judge it?
I think we should not.
Like I personally don't judge anything, and I feel like it's not something just because you know it you can change it.
And there's like nothing like good or bad about knowing, because it's not an obligation to know. So like, why would we say something is good or bad or not?
Because I was thinking you said like if you're in high enough of the position, you don't really need to know the actual relationship between you and other people.
Yeah.
And whereas people who are in lower position have to know the relations between them and higher position of people, because that's how they deal with it. And I think that makes sense, and I think that's how it is. But I don't really feel like I don't really feel like that's something good. You know?
It's not a good thing. I definitely don't think it's a good thing. Like, let me take another example. Do you know the film Monster? This Japanese film.
The Japanese
Monster?
one?
Yeah. So when you're in a different place in the structure, you don't really know what's going on with the other people. Like, your knowledge is kind of determined by your position. For example, you're this teacher. You saw like two kids playing together.
Oh yeah, and people were blaming the teacher.
People think the teacher are like hitting the child, but it's not so. No one's wrong in the system, but something like just happens. Like when you're a student, you know a lot about the teachers. When you're like the teacher, you're teaching, like a lot of what's going on between the children, you don't actually know what's going on. Like you kind of just forget about them as you grow older, or it's somewhere in your brain, but because you're not like the children, you're not like studying with the teacher, you just don't know about it.
So, okay, should we try to know that? Or that's something...
Well, that's like where it gets ambiguous, right? Like, I feel that's the paradox. Because when you want to know something too bad, it's also kind of bad. It's like you should know how to be yourself instead of how to, like, knowing more about the others. That's what I feel like. Like, if you're, like, ruling everything over and you want to know every detail about, like, the people's relationship, it's probably, like, too authoritarian. I don't know if that makes sense. It's just very contradictory.
But what happens if we communicate, we as a people who are in different positions communicate each other about what they think, what we think? I mean, I don't think we can grasp everything, but don't we get at least part of what other party thinks?
Yeah, I feel like you get what other people think, but it can easily get amplified or reduced, like their voice, because of their position. I have to think of a way to say this. Like when you try to communicate, like say in office hours with your professor, it definitely feels different than say you're talking to your friends.
Yeah.
Or even if like you want to communicate with your parents as if they're not your parents, they're still your parents. Like I feel like societal positions is also something that you shouldn't easily just move around with. So it's really hard to say.
It's kind of internalized in a way.
Well, you kind of have to internalize to really understand what's going on.
So we all can know what's going on only from our own positions.
Maybe. Do you think that's depressing? Because I don't really think that's depressing, you know.
Well, I find it kind of depressing. Not depressing, but like a bit sad, maybe. Because like I have this desire of wanting to understand other people and trying to escape where I am. I feel like, I don't know if this makes sense, but I feel like fictions for me is kind of a way to do that. Like I can put myself into one of the characters in novel and I can experience or virtually experience what those characters are experiencing. And, you know, I mean, but at the same time, what you're saying is true, that even though we read the same sentence, what we get out of it is different. What we feel, what we think is different.
Like there are definitely people who are better at, say, being a teacher or better at being a student. I think that's also something you have to learn. Like not just say, oh, there's a power dynamic that I don't like, so I'm not gonna like follow it. I don't think that's how it works. You have to like learn how to like present yourself in your situation.
So do you think, are you arguing that there's like a kind of, we have essentially a self-duty or this like immobility of personal like identity that is being settled, or like, is it being set, being like assigned to you like by like the moment when you are born, is it assigned to you, or?
I feel like that's the part where you cannot really describe it. That's like where, it feels both free and determined. That's not like something we can easily like, describe. It just feels it's something like just there. It's like in the abyss. Like speaking of fiction, like that's what I really feel as well. Because like I've discovered this pattern that there are poets who, if you like this, say X poet, and then you don't really like Y poet because they come from like hugely different perspectives. Like one example is Anne Carson and Louis Gluck. They're both like English poets, but I just discovered that, if you really like Anne Carson, you probably just don't like Louis Gluck that much. Or like unless you learn to like, one of the other poets.
Yeah.
Like because poets and like artists are really intuitional. And like that's something you can really easily see. Like you can read a poem and immediately tell if this poem is for you or not for you. Like when you read poems, a lot of time you're trying to learn like what is going on. And that's the part where it's probably like the poet is really different from you. For example, they have like different span of attentions and they have like different conscious of things. Like if I'm in this room, some people might notice like the way we talk. Some people might think about, the wall, the noise, like the silence in this room that's kind of different from outside. And some poets can talk about like other little details or like our language. So like everyone kind of just notices different things. Like I won't say that's like good or bad. And that can be influenced by power positions or like other factors. It's kind of just what makes us different. And like that's like a part of our identity.
So it's like you are saying vibing, right? Some people are vibing differently with others, and this is like kind of ambiguous, right?
Well, yeah, it's like some people, they vibe with each other very well because they share the same trauma, that kind of thing.
Yes.
It's something like that. It's not something you can just easily say, oh, it's because of, they both grew up in like an Asian country or something. It's much more complicated.
Do you think there's anything everyone shares?
Yeah, like we're all humans, and like there's definitely something that is only restricted to our body or our like brain functions that we don't share with like octopus. Like you can also be like more different than each other, and I don't think that's a bad thing. Like it's just yeah. And also I feel like it's also because we're different, we're kind of similar. It's a paradox.
Or like we are kind of like different in a
Similar
same
way.
pattern. Yeah.
You can be different in a similar way,
In a
or you can be
predictable
like
pattern.
different in a different way.
That's true. If everyone is different from everyone, what does it mean to be
It's
similar?
similar. Then it means similar, right? That's what I've been trying to say, like when I was in philosophy class, because I feel like for example, and statements, like a lot of things are both wrong and right. Let me make one example. If like everyone is Chinese, no one is Chinese. Because there's no other country. You won't think of it as like in terms of country. Because words changes their meanings as sentences go along, as sentences proceed. If everyone is like, asexual, no one is sexual. If everyone is gendered, no one is like non-gendered. But that's not the case. That's because we're different. We have these words that have to like represent the identity we have.
It's kind of like what Kant said, like inclination and like how the differences becomes a part of our properties. But I don't remember like what word Kant was using. Do you remember? But like how these differences contribute to our properties. And because there is like, we can say outliers or like people who doesn't follow the rules. That's why there are rules. I think that kind of resonate with that.
Yeah, it's like, I think it's definitely coexisting. It's not something like, say, one is directed towards the other.
Yeah,
It's
but
not-
like
Yeah.
It's just like I will agree with that, but like, to what extent can we make that argument or like statement that this?
Well, if you think
Well-
about it, what we talked about is also similar to this thing I learned last semester from like a metaphysics class.
Yeah.
It talks about how what defines a thing is by the state of exception. Like, for example, we want to define philosophical theories.
Yeah.
And we have this car that like either kills 1 people or 5 people. It's just differentiated by your decision. And then you start to say, oh, it's because you pull the trigger or something. You're like utilitarian. It's because you don't pull it. It's because these philosophical experiments are state of exceptions.
Yeah.
They are not really defined. And that's why you use it to define the regime of like one concept as opposed to the other.
Yeah.
Like another example is very easily like geometric shapes. You define a triangle by its 3 sides rather than its area. If I tell you the area of like this geometric shape is like 10 square meters,
Yeah.
you won't know if it's a square or triangle. But if I tell you it has like 3 sides or 4 sides,
Yeah.
then you know it's a triangle or, you know, square.
Yeah, that's super interesting. I was reading this one article on my Asian philosophy class. I think it was on Lao Tzu, is it?
Lao Tzu.
Yeah, Lao Tzu.
Oh yeah, you guys are doing Taoism right now.
Yeah. It was on the article. It talks about how by defining what is good, it creates wrong. By defining what is
I know what you're talking about.
yeah.
Okay.
Like the big image has no shape.
Yeah,
I know. It's something like that.
It's super interesting. Yeah, I think about this sometimes. Like if there's alien comes into the earth now, I feel like there's gonna be a peaceful world. Maybe if there's like outside force coming to the earth,
Yeah.
we gonna be the one inside, and the outside force is gonna be the outside.
Yeah, that's very like science fiction. That's like why I like science fiction.
But like eventually it kind of just it represents how like what we consider like Asian philosophies and like Western philosophies. Like Western philosophy they draw the line. Asian philosophy is like it's there. We don't draw the line because by the fact that we are differentiating, we are creating new concepts which they are like intelligible. They're intertwined. But like in Asian philosophy, we kind of preserve the whole fuzziness itself. So it's like sometimes it's really hard to understand what it is, but maybe it's not comprehensible.
Like I agree with you. I think there's something fuzzy about Asian philosophy, but I think that's precisely why it lasts so long, like say 5,000 years or something. Because it's like this in this ambiguous realm, it can really be stretched everywhere, and also I don't know. I think of writing as like having different phases. So, for example, there are writings that are really ambiguous, but they're really inclusive, so they can last a very long time. But there are also writings that last very short, like in the era of like say Reddit, you post something within like 30 words, and then like 30 words, right? And then maybe you delete it in the next hour. So it's like not something you write to like make it last very long. Or there are like diaries you write and it's probably only for your lifetime. And there's like a kind of a priori to knowledge that you have to know something to really like understand what the writing is about in the first place.
Yeah.
So it have to be like really ambiguous or really inclusive in order for you to understand it too. Like if I write something like, because I'm gonna like say I'm gonna go to dinner in like 10 minutes, right? And I write fall. Like no one's gonna understand it besides myself. And the word is gonna lose its function after like 10 minutes after I go to the fall.
Yeah, that's interesting. So I guess like the last question I wanna discuss is how should we talk? How should we communicate? Or should we even talk or communicate given that the word itself is pretty ambiguous? Or say, I feel like we can agree that the word is not that clear, it's pretty ambiguous, and saying a word or using a language is to a certain extent defining something, therefore excluding something.
Yeah.
Should we still use the language? What's the point of talking?
I feel like it's the reason you do everything else. Like, like for example, why do you love? You love sometimes even though even though you know it's impossible. And sometimes it's precisely because it is impossible that we love. It's the same way that Descartes writes about, I think, therefore I exist. Because for him, God is this very important concept that in order for God to exist, then he can exist. And this is, to me, a very novel kind of love. And it's similar to like how poets treat language and like scientists treat science. It's this love that you need this kind of love towards something for you to exist. And this is a mutual relationship we learn to build around the world. And I feel like that's very important.
Yeah. So you're saying, but like kind of to loop back to Yaoki's question and your opinion, I was like saying, how do we find the ground on this? It can be a continuum or it can be just a scattered points, but like what pathway or like what kind of position we find ourselves? Or maybe we don't.
It's something you continue to strive for,
Yes.
but it's not because it doesn't exist, you don't do it. For example, scientists try to unify like two opposite physics theories, or like philosophers, they try to think about different things. They are in the end all trying to unite something. Maybe you can call it like a common language or the unified field. I feel like they're all like the same thing.
But you know, I get that there's like, so you are like supporting, kind of not supporting, but like you will agree with this like, I think we all in some certain aspect that we agree there's like there are like two theories, right? Like people are believing that there is a unified theory or unified knowledge that can like, or the truth or knowledge or kind of like different, and there's no way we kind of unify it.
Yeah, it's like a mutual relationship. Like, for example, you want to prove that God exists. But it's really not because of you God exists. It's because you prove that God exists for you to exist. It's because you want to prove God because you want the God exist. And that is why you exist. You need that for you to exist. Instead of God needs you to exist.
That makes sense. Or it doesn't.
So we need truth.
But, well, like it depends. Like, I think I agree with what Andy says, that whatever you do, you just continue it. Because there's not a direction. We just
It's
go
like-
forward.
I'm saying it's like love. Like, it can be paradoxical. But
Yeah.
it doesn't matter. That's why you love.
No.
If it matters, that's because you don't love hard enough. That means you don't love it enough. You have to love life enough. And it's like, say like marriage. Like, for example, you marry not because you think you're not gonna get a divorce, but because there's a point in life you love someone so much
Yeah.
that you want to get married with them, even though you know marriage might be an institution that makes you suffer,
Yeah.
or marriage might be something that makes you like trouble. You're
Yeah.
gonna become a housewife, or you're gonna have kids, and they're gonna hate you and grow up and everything. But you have to love it hard enough, like, and that's why I think it matters.